Hey, thanks for tuning in. Today I want to talk about authority. Authority is not a subject I thought a lot about for the first 40 years of my life, but it turned out to be central to my own journey, both personally and professionally. And it's a subject that I have seen become really transformative for hundreds of leaders, managers, and people who have no connection to the corporate world at all, who are just looking for how to become their next best version of self, to be more authentic, to be more of who they are, to get more of what they want in their life. The topic of authority is rarely talked about. When you think about in the corporate world, we spend over $90 billion on leadership development here in the US alone. I think it's something like $350 billion globally. You'd be hard pressed to find a single course in any of that $90 billion that's about authority. You'd find some at Refound, but a drop in the bucket relative to $90 billion spent on trying to help leaders become better at their jobs. And yet in this weird, strange, almost comical gap, we're not talking about the thing that sits at the very bottom of leadership, which is authority. How do we show up in the world when we have more power than the person that we are in relationship with in any form, at work, in the context of parenting, in our communities, in the world, in media? How do we show up when we have more authority, not a bigger title, but we have more power, right? We have the ability to negatively influence this person's life, and we spend almost no time thinking about the internal landscape of how we show up to those moments. We're stuck on the tactics. What do we say? What do we do? Vision, goals, metrics, objectives, performance indicators, all the things in the work context. And we rarely think about, well, what does it mean to me to be an authority? And on the flip side, what does it mean to me to have an authority in my life, someone who has more power than I do in this moment? And you can think about that as a personal practice, an element of your personal growth, of thinking about your relationship to being and having authority in your life in the personal domain, in a very sort of humanistic frame, at work, at life, parenting with your kids, in intimate relationships and friendships. You can think about it there, and you can also think about it much more broadly in a spiritual context. What does that mean? Where does our authority end and some other authority begin? What other authority is there? How do we navigate that terrain can be extremely challenging, both personally and professionally. As I said early on, this is a topic that I didn't think much about when I started my own personal journey in earnest. So this was in the late 90s. I was probably 26, 27 years old. I was a lawyer at a big law firm in New York, and I was really unhappy. I was depressed. I was lonely. A lot of my college friends were getting married, and it seemed like they were on this path of life that was the right one to be on, and I wasn't on it. It was a rough time in my life. I was trying to figure things out, and I started getting involved in a whole bunch of different personal practices: meditation, yoga, somatic psychotherapy, counseling, different things that I've talked about and explored, and will explore more in future conversations. But none of that was really talking about authority. Nobody, when I was in my late 20s, said, "Hey, Jonathan, what does it mean to you to, have authority figures in your life? What's your relationship to authority? What's good about having authority figures in your life? What's problematic about having authority figures in life? Do you see yourself as an authority? If not, why not? Are you afraid of authority? If so, why? All right? Do you feel like you're better than authority? If so, why?" There's so many questions that we should be asking ourselves. What influences did I have? Who influenced you to take the positions that you do and the values that you hold? Who were those key influences? Who were the people that you promised yourself you weren't going to be like, right? Who didn't use authority in good ways? And to make this conversation much more tactical and tangible for you, I can tell you this with 100% success rate. With every single person that I have ever worked with in the professional context, whether they're a CEO or a first-time manager, or in personal context, mentoring, trying to help somebody out with a relationship, in every one of those cases, a central obstacle to healing, to getting what this person wanted in their life, was a conflict at the level of authority or self-authority. Who am I? How do I show up in the world? What is my right as a sovereign being? Where do I need to compromise? Where do I need to accommodate? How much do I need to go on the other person's side of things to be empathic? How much do I need to stand for what I believe in? And that is really difficult, nuanced terrain. Now, why is it so difficult? I'm reminded of a workshop that I did back 25 years ago. I was sitting in a workshop. It was very emotional. People were working on some really difficult and deep stuff relative to their family of origin, parenting challenges that they had with their parents, struggles that they had in their life, trauma. And there was a guy, a young man, he was a little older than me. He was probably in his early 30s. And he was just really in a lot of pain. And the facilitator came over to him and was, I would say, trying to console him, but that's not actually what happened. He came over to him and he was trying to help the guy out. And the guy was just, inconsolable. And he asked him, he said, I just want to ask you a question. I want to try to help you out. And the man sort of looked up, teary-eyed and was in a very vulnerable place. And so the facilitator said, I just have a question for you. Do you have parents? And the guy kind of looked at him quizzically. It was like, what a dumb question. He's like, I don't know. Yeah, of course I have parents. And the facilitator looked him dead in the eye, and I'll never forget this moment. He said, you show all the symptoms. And this is a simple, lighthearted, but very practical and often painful truth, is that we all had parents in some form or another, absent parents, present parents, parents we knew well, parents we didn't know at all. We all had extremely powerful influences of authority in our lives when we didn't know how to speak. We didn't know how to communicate. We didn't know how to advocate for ourselves. And even if we did, we didn't have any power to do so. So we were all subject, just speaking in this life alone, forgetting about any other lives and going into any other broader, maybe more spiritual context, just in this life, all of us were subjects to a very powerful authority. And we were in relationship, and we did not have a choice of whether to be in relationship with that authority figure or not. And that authority relationship colors, of course it does, how we show up with authority figures in the rest of our life. Not in a one-to-one, if this, then that. That's not how it works out, at least most of the time not. It's much more complex than that. It's much more nuanced than that. We are complicated, crazy, meta-dynamic beings, right? So it's not, my mother was too tough on me and so I did these things, or my father was too accommodating and so I'm this way. That would be too simple. That would be too easy. That wouldn't get us to where we need to go in ourselves. It's a maze. And the journey of self-discovery, the journey of becoming a good authority to yourself, is in plumbing those depths. And there are so many different ways that you can do that, so many different therapeutic ways that you can challenge yourself. But physically, in your intimate relationships, right? The best place to see your authority triggers, your parenting triggers, your trauma triggers is in relationship, right? When we're on our own, it's much less obvious, right? We can accommodate, we can work around. But when we're in relationship with others, intimate relationships at home, when we become parents, when we become managers, we become leaders, all of a sudden, the floodwaters open and we find ourselves confronted with serious questions that are really important to resolve, to investigate and resolve. But questions about what does it mean to be an authority? What does it mean when I have the power? What does it mean when I don't have the power? And in working with coaching, advising, facilitating, just trying to help people over the last 25 years, in every single one of those cases, if you scratch the surface a little bit, and you know the right questions to ask, you will encounter a conflict relative to authority, self-authority. And that conflict, as I said, takes many forms, but it's usually one of two. It usually takes the form of being too much in compliance, taking on too much of the influence, the input, the advice of the authority figures in our life, where we sell ourselves out too much in that respect, or we rebel. We push back too much and we won't accept any authority in our lives. And both of those are equally problematic. It's maybe hard to accept if you're like some people I know, if you're on the rebellious side, or if you're on the side who tends to push back and say, I know best. I know what's good for me. I know myself. I know my values. It can be difficult to accept that orientation to authority can be just as problematic as the conforming one, as the person who just, goes along to get along, right? And why is that the case? I wrote about this in Good Authority, is that those are two poles that are toggling a centered place of authority, right? If I comply with and I go along and I'm always tending to go with what authority wants me to go with, well, I don't have my own voice. By definition, I don't have my own voice because I'm relying on their voice. I'm borrowing their authority. Problematic or not, right? Whether they were good authority, whether they have done any work on themselves, whether they are accomplished, properly experienced in themselves in the domain that they're trying to help me with. If I'm going along and I'm relying on them and there's no check in that system, we will be finding ourselves in a place of borrowing authority on the compliance side of the ledger, so to speak. Many of us have been there. I've been there. I've been there in an extreme way a couple of times in my life, in my adult life, where I didn't realize that I had done that, where I stopped standing for myself. It happened once in a professional setting and once with a mentor, people that I trusted, people who had a lot of interesting, good, insightful things to say, not just about my life, but about me. They were very observant. They were really trying to help in some weird ways, but they were deeply wounded in themselves. And I couldn't see it, right? Because I was too accommodating. I was too complying with their authority. I was too afraid to stand for myself at those points in my life. And it came at a great cost. I sold myself out. On the other side, there have been times in my life, many of you have had this, where I rebelled, where I said, no, I'm not going to do it this way. That happened more with me and my parents, maybe for some of you. My parents are lovely people. We have a great relationship, but I went through a significant period of my life where I felt like I had to reject them outright in a really strong way. Needed to separate myself, and for sure there were some good reasons to do that, and there were some healthy reasons to do that. But it was coming from such a push, right? It was coming from such an urgency and such a need to break away that I was still not in my own center. I was still not with myself, right? So on the one side, borrowing too much authority from authority figures, and the other side, rebelling too much. And the process of discovery for me, and I've counseled so many people on, is to find who you are in between those poles. Because if you're only ever conforming and going along, well, for sure you don't have yourself. Right? Pretty obvious that you don't have yourself. But if you only ever rebel, you don't have yourself either. And speaking from personal experience, you can be equally lost on both of those polarities. You can feel like you're in a really good place on either side, and you can be equally lost and not know it. So this journey of authority, of finding one's authority, it's a deep one. It's a lifelong one. This is a subject that I've been thinking about and trying to work on in myself as a leader for the last 15 years. And another 10 years before that, just as a personal journey. But it's not something that was framed for me in a way that was really effective, right? I didn't really have a protocol or a path to actually work on that. And so a lot of times when I'm working with leaders, these are some of the formative questions that I ask. And I ask it for a very specific reason, because if you get to know somebody and you build a little bit of a trust with a leader, and I mean any leader of any kind, from the most famous CEOs in the world to leaders that you've never heard of, to first-time managers, to soccer coaches and everything in between. If you get to know them and they've been in the world for more than a couple of minutes and they've had a couple of jobs, they have had an experience of a boss in their life who didn't treat them well. And most people have an egregious one or more than one. A boss who abused the power that they had in an overt or a covert way. Every time. I've never met someone, unless it's, their first job and they've never been in the workforce before. Maybe they're 17 years old and they get their first summer job. Maybe they're exempt. But people who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and on, everybody. I've never met someone who hasn't. If you think you're someone who hasn't, maybe we can find a time to connect, and I'll try to help you see it. It's not a bad thing. It's actually a really good thing. It's worse to be in denial and think, oh, I've never had an experience like that, right? Or people who say, oh, my childhood was perfect, right? Like, ooh, it's not a great orientation if you want to learn something about yourself to pretend like everything was perfect in your family of origin, or in your marriage, or in your relationship, or in your company culture. Not a good strategy, because it surely isn't perfect. You're a flawed human being, as we all are. And every situation is complex and has a lot going on. So, I understand the impulse, right? Sometimes like you don't want to throw your parents under the bus. You don't want to make it seem like you're ungrateful or those kinds of things. And that's fair. But two things can be true at the same time, right? We can be grateful. We can have gratitude for the things that our parents or other folks in authority gave us, and also realize some of the legacy of those relationships wasn't so great. So as we show up to professional relationships, before we even think of being a great leader, and I mean a great leader at the level of people, not at the level of a business strategy or operations. For sure, that's important and valuable. For sure, that's important and valuable. But I'm talking about being a leader of people, being a leader at the cultural level, inspiring people, helping them grow, helping them see the things about themselves that need to change. You can't really do that work effectively, thoughtfully, and cleanly if you haven't done that work in yourself. So that's really my invitation to you, is whatever that looks like, whatever stage you are in your own leadership. If you've never led a team, that's fine. If you've been leading teams for decades, I invite you to take some steps into this journey and really focus on this topic of authority. What does it mean to be an authority? Just hold that question in your mind. Hold that question in your heart as you go through your day, as you sit in on meetings, as you go into your one-on-ones, as you talk with your team, as you talk with the board of directors, if you're a CEO or in C-suite, and they have more authority in some certain context than you. I want you to sit with that question for a bit. You don't have to do anything with it. Just sit with it. Let it work on you. Good self-reflection is often a time of letting something work on you, not working on something. Because when we try to work on, I'm going to fix my things, we tend to go into solution mode and task mode. And what I really want you to be is reflective. I really want you to be in a listening mode for these next couple of weeks, and think about, I never really thought about how I show up as an authority in meetings. I never really thought about how I show up as an authority in my emails. I never really thought about the influence that my authority has in these, that, and the other ways. And the flip side, I never really thought about the ways in which my experiences of having authority are coloring, influencing, or filtering my ability to listen to this person who has more authority than I do in this moment. This is such rich ground. I can tell you, of all of the practices that I've done in my life over the last 25 years, meditation practice, long 10-day meditation retreats in silence, intensive yoga and other somatic practices, deep physical challenges, water fasting, psychedelics, all the things. It all circles around this topic of authority, because authority goes directly to self. It goes directly to authenticity. It goes directly to identity. Who am I? Who am I to myself? Who am I to others? Who am I to the world? Who am I to spirit? And these are the questions that are really worth asking. And we have this incredible opportunity to do this, not only for ourselves, but for others. So as we close up this conversation, first of all, thank you so much for listening. I know this topic can seem really abstract. I hope you'll reply back and send me some notes and some comments. And it's a subject that's really difficult to get into sometimes, but really valuable, really fruitful. But as you think about this topic, it's really a great opportunity to pay it forward and talk to other people and see other people. Because sometimes it's easier to see this topic. Oh, I see this person. Oh, they're just rebelling. They're not really listening to that person. I wonder what's going on for them. I'm going to ask them. Maybe it has something to do with their relationship to authority. Sometimes observing and seeing folks around us and the way they relate with authority in weird ways can help us start to turn that mirror around and do that same inquiry for ourselves. Thanks so much for listening.